Hi, everybody. This is La Lista, a LatinX writers podcast. I am your host, Ruben Mendive. And today I have a fellow podcaster, a writer. So we'll start with, I always like to have my guests introduce themselves. So a little bit of who you are, how you identify, just so that people can get an idea and also get a sound of your voice too.
Hey, everybody. This is Cruz Castillo. I am a writer. I'm an actor. I'm a producer. I'm a creator. I call it creator just now in general because when you're a Latinx and you got to make your own projects, you pretty much just do everything. Mm-hmm. So, my pronouns are he and he and him. Yeah, he and him. I was mixing up in my head. But yes. Yeah, I go by he and him. I'm LA born and raised, and I'm out here like you doing it. And I give you props for doing this because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of hard work. Yeah.
Yeah, more work than I thought, but that's fine. All right. So I know this is a loaded question for Latinx people.
Bring it.
Where are you from?
Where are you from? Yeah. I am from Los Angeles, California. I was born and raised in LA. Mm-hmm. I was born in Glendale, and then my first city I grew up in was Los Feliz. But my main city that I grew up, like my actual... all those teenage years and young adult years was Whittier, California, the very end of LA County. It's a beautiful city. Yeah. I love it. I have a lot of good friends and family from there, and I have a lot of good people that influenced my life. A lot of my stories originate from Whittier.
Yeah, and when did you move to Whittier?
First moved to Rose Hills when I was maybe like 10, 11.
Got it.
And then I moved. Rose Hills is like the outer skirts of Whittier. Rose Hills is the largest has the largest cemetery in all of the world, I think.
Wow.
Organized cemetery. Because we all know that the United States is built off of an indigenous genocide. So this is pretty much all. So then I moved from Rose Hills to Whittier, maybe when I was about like 12. And then that's when it pretty much started. And then we moved into like from an apartment to an apartment, then a house. And then was majority of my teen years and my early 20s were there. Okay.
So I do want to talk about Los Feliz. I want to know what it was like, because you said you lived there for a little bit.
Yeah.
What do you remember? I'm just from how it is now, I'd love to like get a glimpse of what it was when you were growing up there for a little bit. Do you have any memories?
Yeah, vaguely, but I do remember some stuff because it was me and my mom. And then it was my mom and my aunt, and then my aunt moved out, and then my grandfather moved in and helped my mom in the beginning. A lot of my first friends were a lot of Filipinos and Armenians. So I used to think I was Filipino and Armenian. Like that's what I was identifying with.
Yeah.
And then I would watch a lot of like family sitcom shows on TV, and there were the black families like Family Matters and the Cosbys and Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
Yeah.
So I thought I was black. And I was just finding things that I identified as. So for a while in Los Feliz, my identity was like Filipino, black, and Armenian. Yeah. But then my mom was like, you're not. You're a brown boy and all this stuff like that. But she was like teaching me who these different people were and how we all connect. My mom is very woke.
I know a little bit about your mom, and she's very impressive. I'm sure. And, this sort of follows. I do want to mention that, like, I sort of had the same thing growing up, just from TV. Like I love Moesha and Sister. Because again, those were the people that looked the most like us on TV.
And we understood their stories the most.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I talked to like white friends of mine this age, and they're like, they've never even heard of Moesha. I was like, that was my shit.
What?
Like, yeah. But I guess just because they had 20 other shows that they could be watching.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, we only had like, I don't know, the 90s were like super black. I feel like there was a ton of shows.
For sure. Yeah.
So I feel like I always was like, oh, like you said, like there's some sort of kinship because they're the only real representation we had at that time.
Yes, 100%. Watching Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, like I was an only child to a single parent mom who was a woman of color. And Will Smith was the same thing. And he went to go live with a rich aunt and uncle. And I didn't go live with any rich aunt or uncle, but just to see what he was going through and the stuff he would deal with. And I was just like, that I related more to that than I related to like Step by Step or like
Yeah.
All in the Family and stuff like that. Oh, and those are great shows. I
Yeah.
still love those sitcoms, but those are like big old like white families with like
Yeah.
mom and dad and
And the
5
big
to 6
house.
kids.
And like, I was like, oh, what's that like?
And never having financial troubles or like
Yeah.
worrying about being people of color or like being
Yeah,
harassed
yeah.
by police or anything. Like, they didn't have those things.
Yeah.
So
I feel like those
Yeah.
sitcoms did a lot of damage to like kids of color growing up just because, you know, like we really didn't have anything that really reflected our experience. So we sort of started to aspire to those things, you know?
And we thought something was wrong with us.
Yeah.
And we thought something was broken, which something is broken, but it's not us.
Yeah. So I do want to talk about your mom, and, you know, sort of like your mom, your grandparents, like what's their story? Like how, like,
Oh, where's my family come from?
yeah, where do they come from? Like, how did they end up in California? Like, were they always here? You know, I know that's a story of some people. Like,
So since I was a kid, my mom always reminded me that I was like a brown boy born on stolen land. So we are indigenous. And specifically, we know of Tiwa, which Chihuahua people, which is Isleta Pueblo in New Mexico. But, you know, they integrated and pushed indigenous people all over the place. So we're mixed. But that was the main tribal affiliation that we know of, nation affiliation that we know of. And so growing up as a kid, that's what I was always told, that at the end of the day, you originate from here. This is you and your people. Now that you get that, I'm going to explain borders and how separate states and these like governance come in here and mark lines that don't really exist, but they do exist for political or governance reasons. And so my grandmother, Graciela Jaime, her mother, Mercedes Jaime, she's a badass. And she is from Mexico, Juarez, and she basically fell in love with some guy. And this is the only story we got about it. Fell in love with some man that basically up and left her. Supposedly left her at the altar, but I feel like that's always just a story they say to make it seem like it was almost legitimate. But and a weird thing, I know he was indigenous. He was really brown, straight black hair, the way they describe him. We have one photo of him and it's very blurry, but you can definitely tell he is some native Mesoamerican. And he was missing a hand. And that's the only descriptor that we get.
that's quite a story, though.
Yeah.
If you're going to have some details, those are the details to have. You know?
Yeah. This is those Mexican drama, chisme stories. That's what this all was. It was
That's half the stories my dad tells me.
Yeah.
Cover that sort of category.
Yeah. And how much do you know is real and how much?
Well, he'll tell people a story about my childhood. I'm like, those are 3 different stories into one. Like I let him have it at this time. Like, I'm just like,
yes.
Did that happen? Like, a version did. But
Yeah. And I think that's part of the thing. Like, we as people of color, and I know specifically from like my native roots, you're storytellers. Like, so many indigenous things are oral. They didn't write things down because part of the transferring of meaning and understanding and belief was through telling people, through the exchange of, we have to sit down and enjoy this moment and take it in together. And we're going to exchange a story that not only is a story of me, but of us and of where we come from and where we're going and where we are right now.
Yeah.
And I feel like that indigeneity crosses over into our Latinidad of your parents telling these grandiose stories of this and that. Everyone loves stories. We're all storytellers in some way, shape, or form, even if it's in your head and you're telling yourself stuff and repeating things, and you're still telling yourself a story. And so we need stories, and we deserve stories, and we need to give each other stories. And that's how we understand and grow. So your dad doing that, like, it's a form. My mom does the same thing too. My grandma does. Yeah. But it's a form. Now I do. But you and I were just trying to make money doing it now.
Truly. Now that you have said that, I am like, I want to apologize to my dad. He was just teaching me valuable skills.
He prepared you for all this.
Yeah.
Shout out to your dad.
So, you know, I am, you know, a Mexican immigrant. Like, and, you know, I think I didn't, you know, my experience is very much of an immigrant. I never really knew that there was, you know, Latinx people with like native roots in this place we call the U.S. or, so when I first moved to Southern California, I started discovering that there was, you know, some shared heritage, some shared culture, and you know, I've had another guest who who has a similar like identity, but he's more uncomfortable sort of claiming it as his, you know?
Oh, claiming the indigeneity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wanted to sort of get your journey with that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very mixed bag. There's a lot of white rules that have been created for telling indigenous people markers for how they judge one another. And there's two really good books by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. And one is An Indigenous People's History of the United States. And the other is, oh my God, I'm not remembering right now. But it's basically her going over, I think, the top 20 myths about being indigenous and like all these things like, oh, so you get money from the government, right? Because you're indigenous.
Even I know that. Like,
yeah. And you're all from reservations, right? And it's like, no.
Yeah.
So it's all these, and the idea of like, and also language and people saying like, oh, let's sit Indian style and like, oh, going off the reservation, or, oh, this is my tribe. Those are not good terms that white people have created. And that's like appropriating and like stealing away indigenous identity and culture and Indian giving and Indian burns. Like those are all like really bad things.
About this.
Yeah. And so it's a mixed bag. So you're going to have you will have some mixed indigenous people telling other people it's your blood quantity. It's how much indigenous blood you have. I think that's always a weird marker. And then the other one is your tribal affiliation and your tribal association, or what nation you come from. They're always going to tell you that if you don't have one of those, you are not indigenous. And in all other, like, excuse my language, but in all of that, that's bullshit. And it's just pure garbage. It's pure crap. Because at the end of the day, indigenous people, the largest genocide in modern history occurred on this land when white people came over, colonizers, and they oppressed indigenous people. And we are all products of rape. In some way, shape, or form, somewhere we are products of rape.
Yeah. Ouch. Yeah.
And it's from a people that didn't want this to happen to them, but it did. And it was forced upon them from whatever means occurred. It happened at some time. And it doesn't speak ill or bad about us. It's a truth. It's a story that we need to know to understand who we are, where we come from, and where we should go from here. And it's this huge debate, but just a lot of indigenous people got whitewashed and they went to boarding schools, and like these boarding schools were disgusting and horrible and terrible. And my friend Sebastian works at a 7-Eleven down the street from where we live. And there is an indigenous man who is homeless, and he is an alcoholic. He drinks a lot. In that book by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, she does break down that myth too of indigenous people are all alcoholics. That's also bullshit. But he is. And one time I came into 7-Eleven like at 1 a.m. to visit Sebastian, and he was there and he had a sign that was hungry, and I bought him food. And when I bought him food, he was sitting there talking to us and telling us his story. And he comes from those boarding schools, like one of the last ones. And they used to like beat and just, they would cut a lot of their hair. And like in some indigenous cultures, long hair is such a sign of just pride and culture. And they would cut it, and they would shame these kids and beat the language out of them and beat the culture out of them. And a lot of them were raped. There's a lot of sexual misconduct and sexual molestation going on there. There's things like that. These boarding schools that came in and they pushed out and made people feel shame for being indigenous. And so I think what's happening right now is this is like the second civil rights movement in this country. And the Chicano movement has now evolved into that Aztec guy holding that woman, which is still problematic in itself of like machismoism. Yeah. It's now evolving into step away from that Spanish language, white colonizer identification. And we're moving to our indigenous roots because we belong here, and this is our land, and this is our people. And we are caregivers and people who take care of this earth. This is our mother. And that is just, I remember seeing a debate one time on Instagram, and it was these people going back and forth about tribal affiliation and blood. And someone just wrote, yo, everyone needs to stop. At the end of the day, everyone's just trying to come home. And you just need to let people come home. So if your friend knows he is, and he has it somewhere in his lineage, and he, even if it's small and he identifies with it, he can be an ally. Like he can say, I know it's in me somewhere. And it's been pushed, it's been shoved, it's been, raped and oppressed out
Yeah.
of me. But he can be an ally, and he can still stand up and speak and try to connect and try to get to know or figure out where it is that stems from. So I think he totally should.
Yeah. Yeah. And you make a good point, because it is like, I always talk about this podcast, how, our insecurities of our identity and how we sort of, how we see ourselves, how other people see us, how we try to be someone else is, for Latinx people, sort of, and a lot of other people, it's sort of measured against whiteness,
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, that insecurity is very much like set up by a structure of colonizers that,
Yes.
and it's like, and again, it's like, I understand that, but then it's also to be like, and that was the whole point. Like this is what they want. Like
They're still fucking with you somewhere in your head. Yeah.
because, my family's from Mexico, and I don't feel, I know there is like people that are from, like Latin and South America, and identify and celebrate sort of an indigenous root.
Yeah.
I will speak for myself. I know I come from a colonized people. I know that the color of my skin, the language my family grew up speaking, the religion we raised in, is all a result of colonization.
Mm-hmm.
But I still would never feel, or I don't feel comfortable claiming some sort of indigenous root, just because I can't trace it. And of course that is the whole point. That was done purposefully to sort of erase a culture. But it does like make me cringe a little bit, because I don't know if I have, I don't even know if it's a right, or just like I can't find the through line, even though it was cut somewhere on purpose.
Yeah.
So that's why when I talk to people like you who, are very, comfortable in their identity and was always like sort of a part of how they grew up.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm comparing to somebody else's whose experiences are different than my own.
Yeah.
But it is fascinating to me. And also like, I know that you and the other guests I had aren't the only people that are sort of have these shared identities,
Yeah.
I want to know, like you said, your mom sort of talked to you about this stuff, and like, so, how did she find that,
My mom, I'm lucky to have the woman I have, because you're talking about this identity stuff. I am lucky to have my mom, who was right away like pushing this stuff on me and saying like, I want you to know where you come from and who you are, because you're not going to know where you're going unless you know where you came from. And she was very proud of, because we are, our other family, my mom's father, my grandfather, William, he comes from New Mexico, Belen. And those people come from the Alvarez del Castillo. And we can literally trace our lineage all the way to Spain. And it was this guy named Don Miguel Alvarez del Castillo that was the captain of a ship. We have all the original paperwork. Alex Castillo, someone who's way older than me, he was older than my grandfather. I met him when I was a kid, but he was in his late 90s. He traced our lineage all the way back to Spain, the white lineage. And he drew all that back to here. And Don Miguel Alvarez del Castillo came over here, planted a flag, and basically was one of the original people of Belen, this small town in New Mexico. And so the Castillo side is always very well aware of its Spanish Castillo heritage and its pride in that. And I don't mean their pride like they're like white power kind of stuff like that. But they're just, they're very well aware.
Yeah.
And somewhere, Belen is by Isleta Pueblo in New Mexico. It's like literally like Isleta's like less than 30 down the Rio Grande. They mixed, and they just started, over time, people mixing with indigenous people in the area. And that's how that got interwoven into us. Let alone my grandmother's side that came from Mexico. My great-great-grandmother, Maria Quinones, I have a full-on photo of her and everything. It's in her family in the house on the piano. And she's in like a uptight uniform, like up to her neck, white colonizer clothing, but she is indigenous as hell, like brown skin, strong nose, strong black hair and everything. And so we know we have indigenated from her side. So it's just, these things are there and we know of it, but like my grandma spoke of it. My grandma Graciela, she spoke of it a little bit. She's super Catholic and like super ignorant Catholic sometimes. And she is very like, there's one time where she was like, they canonized Junipero, F that guy. And I was like, you're Catholic? What do you mean F that guy? Like, you love the saints. And she was like, no, do you know how many indigenous people he like oppressed and raped and jailed and forced to do this? And I'm just like, whoa, grandma, like this 83-year-old woman who pretty much always sides with the church, like blindly faith Catholicism, was like open to like, no, saying no, Junipero should not be canonized, all this stuff. And I was really impressed. So there's always a little bit, the white people were not that strong enough to shut down our indigeneity somewhere.
Yeah.
And so my mom's always been well aware of that. And so my mom put that in me. And I think it's just because the rest of my family, they're all Castillo. And yeah, we are indigenous, but then that's about as far as it goes. But my mom was like, no, I'm going to trace this. I'm going to go find it. And she went to Isleta Pueblo and she got more involved with the community and the people and trying to understand and just trying to come home. She's just trying to come home. And so when she raised me, I was the next generation who luckily didn't have to go search. I was just born into.
Yeah.
And like she named me and I was given a name and I was baptized in Isleta Pueblo at like this really old church from the 1600s from a priest, rest in peace, to this Irish priest. He was an Irish immigrant that basically used to baptize immigrants that would cross the border as a means of giving them documentation and paperwork in the U.S. so they could get through the system faster. And he used to do it. He had like an illegal underground baptismal thing to get them through. Yeah. And he baptized me and my mom was very proud of that. Like, I'm not a Catholic, but I'm very proud of that Catholic aspect.
Yeah.
So we were very integrated into Isleta, and my mom made sure, like when I was a kid, you wait a while before you figure out naming your child, and she named me Moonwater, and in Chihuahua, it's Ba-Ithaba, and so that's my indigenous name, Ba-Ithaba, and she just wanted to make sure that I had more. So I'm sure like my kids will be more engrossed in it, that's just how you push it, and you try to figure it back. And she also does the 23andMe and Ancestry.com. She does the genetic tests, the DNA tests, just to find out what other aspects it says that our indigenous blood comes from, and not as a means to go and claim and say, hey, we're this too, but just to trace back and to know and be like, okay, I am something. Yeah. So I can claim that because it is in my blood, and my family didn't die for that, for me to not claim it.
Yeah. And you know, that's what I talk about sometimes, you know, with Latinx people, our identity is, you know, sometimes we don't feel like we're enough of this, enough of that, too much of this, like, and, you know, I was talking to my other guest, Gilbert, who, you know, traced his line, like got his like ID card because he needed, because his grandfather was from like a certain, you know, tribe. Oh yeah,
you can see, that's another thing. The United States government will give you these identification cards.
And you know, within the last couple of years, he's sort of been trying to find his home back in the old like homeland. And we sort of did get into this talk about how I was trying to describe it, just how you know, we as a people are so insecure with our identity and don't think we're enough of this or that as compared to the dominant culture, but that the thing that makes us unique is that despite, like, we are the result of like our parents' journeys, our grandparents' journeys, but we're also the result of policies and governments and borders. And I was just thinking like, we're so insecure of like, you know, this is who I am, this is all the identities I make up, and I don't feel comfortable claiming it, and I also don't feel like I aspire to whatever the dominant culture is. Yeah. And I was just sort of trying to frame it in the sense like, why don't we like appreciate that is alone a miracle, that someone can exist in like Southern California that has this ancestry, that has another ancestry that is the result of all this stuff, political and social. And then Gilbert's the one that mentioned like it's the tenacity of our people, you know, that despite everything, we're still here. And we should be proudful of that we carry that within us instead of like, you know, thinking that we don't measure up in some way.
That's the whole thing of your existence is resistance. Just the fact that you're here, your ancestors made it in some way, shape, or form. Yeah. So as much as like we fear death and we will die, your immortality is through the passing on and the next set of kin keeping up that legacy that whatever morals, ethics, ideals, things that drive you, you live on in some way, shape, or form. So I do, tenacity and existence is resistance. So shout out to Gilbert, because that's awesome. And I agree. And it is weird because you have like the identity of being black is a brand new thing. Black people is a solely United States, this country thing, because they were a people that were taken from their land and shoved to forget their ancestry and cut off from that, much like some indigenous people are. They know they come some ancestry from Africa, but they don't know where or what connections they have to it, but they do know that they are black. So they were something brand new and different. And so every time we say like Latinx, Latino, or Hispanic culture, we are something different, because we're not so much as like a people as so much Latinidad is like an overall culture. Because at the end of the day, then you start to separate into like Mexican, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Dominican, all these different Bolivian, all these different things start to like divide it. And then even then you saying that is still a country of association to like a white Spaniard colonizing thing. But somewhere your people were mixed, your indigenous people were mixed into the white blood, or your family stayed white and those Spaniards refused to mix with other people. Like there's a lot in Argentina and there's a lot in Cuba that refused to mix. They didn't want to taint their blood. They wanted to take their land, but they didn't want to taint their blood. So when you talk about Latinx, that's an identity. That's a cultural identity as opposed to like a genetic makeup. And I think that's such like a weird concept compared to like being black. Black is like, we know where we come from. Indigenous is like, we know where we come from. But even then in indigeneity, there's nations. So like every time we clump indigenous people together and people like say like, oh, Native Americans and natives and indigenous people or Indians. I hate that term, but you're not realizing that they are subcultures within each other. There are multiple tribes and nations. Like there were way more here in the Americas than there were in Europe. So when Europeans came over, there were a lot. So that in itself you're right. It's all these societal subsections and these divided things, but we are united through. So like in the eyes of Donald Trump, all Latinos are Mexicans. I talk about this all the time.
Like in the census form, when I haven't said this, but in my census form, I have to mark down white.
Caucasian.
And I am like, do we want to like, because again, that's like, why do I put down white where I don't feel white? You know, like
no way, and no way are they white people accepting you as white.
Yeah, exactly. And like, and I remember when I filled out my naturalization form to become a citizen, I just put down other, because the only time I really get that form is at school when they're doing random testing, and I would just put down other because I didn't see my thing. It was like race, and then that next like ethnicity, Latino or not. Yeah. And then the guy that was there, he's like, "Oh no, like you're white." And it's like the first time that I was like, I'm like, really? Because this whole struggle hasn't felt very white. Like, but it and like just like you just said, like my brother has tried to like sort of explain to me like sort of why that is the case on this government form, but it was so different from the experience I had living in this country that and again, I don't know if it's like should I just like, who cares, it's a form, like it is the white man's form, or is there another category that we should fight to be included in? Because it is a weird beast. It's like it is a beast. Because at the end of the day, there are marking you as white, and you're like, I don't benefit from anything of being white. I don't got no privilege. I don't got no supremacy or anything. So I'm not white in the way that you're saying. But at the same time, too, if we do mark ourselves as Hispanic was a term that started in the 70s, and then we start to mark ourselves as Latino or Latinx, we are still subjugating ourselves to a white man's term and a white man's lingo. Like, in the end of the day, I do prefer Latinx over all the rest because Latinx is meant to be inclusive. And when you're Hispanic, your origins derive from Spanish speaking. When you're Latino, you're saying your roots come from Latin America, which in my opinion was the indigeneity. You're acknowledging that your ancestors somewhere came from here. And that's why Brazilians are included. So, and it gets rid of the Spaniards because those guys are white guys. But Latinx is like overall inclusive to the LGBTQ plus and all those that are non-binary identifying. And I think that's great. And that's what we should do. And that's why language changes and it evolves.
And also too, there's a lot of debate with amongst Latinos. They're like, that doesn't fit in the Spanish of the O and the A and the masculine and the feminine. They're not trying to, dude. It's a pronoun in and of itself. Like when Latinos are saying like, they're speaking Spanish and like, vámonos a Disney. A lot of them say Disneyland. I've heard a lot of them just keep that pronoun as itself, Disneyland.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with LatinX. It's a pronoun. You don't need to change your O or A. You don't need to switch Spanish. You're just acknowledging the X. That's it. Mm-hmm. And even then we fight for this term, but it's still a white people's term that we're fighting over. So it's like, you should resist. This country is run and operated by white privilege and white supremacy. This is a Christian nation. You should try to do things like that speak up and say, I should put other and then I should put Latinx or like in all these things mixed and all this stuff like that. But you also want to register in the census to give Latinos power. Like, I know that in the census, Latinos make up 18% of the U.S. and that was the last census taken. That is complete bullshit. Mm-hmm. There's no way we were 18. We were way more. But there's so many people who are undocumented that were scared of being registered. And now they're doubly scared of being registered with this one because Trump and his ignorant governing body right now are fearmongers. They're just trying to instill this hate and fear. And so people, they don't want us to register because I guarantee you that 18% back in the day was probably 20.
Yeah.
And if not, we're probably almost a quarter. Yeah. And by now we are definitely a quarter, if not more.
Yeah.
And they don't want that to be acknowledged because then guess what happens? Reparations begin. Yeah. Like, no, but like, you have to start acknowledging.
Yeah. And that's sort of, you know, there was like some media study that came out about, you know, representation within, you know, different races in the media or television. And I remember it was being protested because, you know, there wasn't a category for Latinx people. Like it was a very like black or white thing. Mm-hmm. And again, and that's, you know, sort of where I'm like, if we're not even counted, then we don't have a number where then we can't say like, oh, our representation is like 10%. I'm sure it's probably not even that high, but then like that's the number that the companies will use that will be fought for the statistics. And because again, I think within that study, we were measured within, you know, white people, Caucasians. Yeah. So I am like, if we're not counting, then we're being ignored. And like, when it comes to data, because data is just important to like a lot of other people. Yeah. You know? But also other times people just choose to ignore the data.
It's quantitative and qualitative and it does. Yeah. So it does count, but then it also shouldn't count. It's like a weird thing. Mm-hmm. Like, it is like, there's a comic book called Scalped and it's about indigenous people and a reservation, but it was written by a white guy and it was colored and drawn by a white guy. But it's about indigenous people. So you're going to see this come out. I don't know if it's Vertigo. I don't remember who it is, but I thought the comic was all right. It wasn't anything amazing, but it wasn't anything bad either. But like, again, like in it, there was an ignorance of, this white guy. He had the two indigenous people speaking and he's like, what's up, redskin? And in indigenous culture, redskin is not, it's the equivalency of the N-word for black people. Yeah. Indigenous people do not call each other redskins. Like, hey, what's up, redskin? Redskin comes from when white people used to scalp us and blood. Your skin was red because of all the blood. And that's also in Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz's book, Indigenous People's History of the U.S.
Read this book.
Scalped, the way the marketers will see that and the people, the white men that run the whole thing, they're going to see it as, because indigenous people are going to, this is written by white people. I'm not going to see this and I'm not going to read this. So you don't read it. And guess what happens? White people are like, oh, see, this is why we don't make things about indigenous people because it doesn't sell.
Yeah. But it was rigged from the start.
Like, yeah. But so it's like this weird catch-22 that you got to support it. So they go, oh, okay, maybe we should give more money and profit to this. But also too, you're like, I'm not trying to say that you should continue to use white people to write stories because they shouldn't. Exactly. We should be writing our own stories. And on top of it, the whole idea of saying scalped, in history, in all these Western movies, you always see indigenous people scalping. It's actually white people that started scalping. Mm-hmm. White people used to scalp indigenous people as a means of showing the governing bodies in the states or the 13 colonies that, hey, we're clearing out the land. You used to get money for killing indigenous people. You had to show proof by bringing scalps. So the white people started the scalping, but yet you always associated due to Hollywood movies that it was indigenous people that scalped.
Yeah.
But they scalped in retaliation to what they were doing to them. It was a joke. It was a fuck you. It was a flip off to what these white people were doing to them. So that's also on Roxanne Dunbar's book.
Okay, I'm going to go to your local bookstore and buy it. And if they don't have it, go to the library. You know?
Yeah. Please support your local libraries.
So let's talk about you in Whittier, like you growing up there, like those formative years. Like I always tell people this. I don't know if it applies for everybody, but like, who were you? How did people see you? Who were you pretending to be? Like,
okay. I was dumb. No, I was dumb. You always, when you look back at it and you're like, oh, I was dumb back then. But that's a part of growing up. Let me think. In Whittier, I was an only child. So I had to have a lot of independence and self-reliance from the get-go. My mom was a hardworking woman, so she was constantly working. Not to say like she wasn't there for me. My mom was there. She was like putting me in book school programs and like after school programs and in sports and theater. She made me do a lot of things to be involved. She didn't let me not get a well-rounded education. And that's partly why she sent me to private school, was for the education and not so much the Catholicism, but she liked that because it was an added bonus. So I went to Catholic school, private school, and I hated those kids. I mean, I don't hate them, but like I hated the experience because a lot of them were like rich white kids and they had both their parents there. As unhappy as their parents could have been in that marriage, they were still there because that's what is appropriate or looks good, I guess. It doesn't matter if you're unhappy or not. So I used to fit in and then not fit in, especially with my experiences and things I would talk about. And there were some Latinos in there, but they were like white Americanized Latinos and like 3/4, 5th generations. And I just didn't get along a lot with them. And I remember like one experience, we were playing touch football and I intercepted a catch and this kid got mad at me as we were walking out for the football and he yelled at me and he was like, "Fuck you, Cruz. Go home and eat your frijoles and your tortillas." And I was like, "What?" And I shoved him against the wall and I punched him in the gut. And I remember being like, I remember this other kid saying, "Stop, the nuns are out there." And there was a nun coming out the door from the bookstore, the library at the time. So he was like, don't go any further. So I had to walk away because you don't want to get in trouble because then I look like the brown kid beating up the white kid. Cause
not a cute look.
So then I went to Lista High School because my mom gave me the freedom and the option. She was like, "Do you want to continue private school or public? You're now 13, 14. Make your own decisions." And so I was like, F that. I'm bouncing out of private school. I do not want to deal with any more like stuck up rich kids like this. So I went to Lista. In Whittier at that time was Whittier. It was predominantly white and it's not anymore. I think as of the 2010 census, it was now like 51 or 52% Latino. But back when I was going into high school, it was predominantly white. So I went to Lista, which was even more of the white school, which is even more of the rich white kids in an area called Friendly Hills, which was where all the white kids lived, all the rich kids. I went and I played water polo and I did swim and I did like choir and I did theater. And I experienced like subtle discriminations there. I had a theater teacher. I won't name his name because I know he's still there. But
this is a call out podcast.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Carter. Mr. Carter was trash to me sometimes. And I just remember one time, because I grew up without my dad, I remember one time sitting in the school with my friend Peter Cruz, and we were in the choir room eating lunch, just like, I think it was raining outside. So we were sitting there and the fridge was there and Mr. Carter came in, grabbed food, and we were just chilling. I want to say, I think we were playing Pokemon, and he was playing Pokemon and I was reading a book. And Mr. Carter just was like, "Hey, Cruz," while he was like ruffling through his lunch, "You grew up without your dad, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "Okay." And he was putting away stuff and he was like, "I just wanted to make sure." It explains a lot about you. And then he left. And we were just like, what the fuck? Like, what the hell does that mean? And it was already very established that he didn't like me. But I was a damn good actor. And so I knew that when I was auditioning for stuff, I was nailing all those things, but he would refuse to put me in lead roles. But I'm a damn good actor, and I know that because I've been acting since I was 5. So by the time we were in high school, I'd been doing like 10 years plus. I've been doing a lot of like local area theater and stuff in LA. So I knew I was like, especially in like Lucerna, where it's just kids just like wanting to like, oh, I just want to try acting. I knew I was nailing stuff, and he refused. He like really fought me. I think it's because I didn't give into like what he wanted, and I didn't like, everyone was always trying to kiss his butt. All these like choral choir kids were always trying to like fit in and be a part of the cool kid, or what they deemed as the cool kids with him. but I didn't. And I didn't believe in that. And I believed in like your work ethic is what shows if you should be here at the table or not. And he just didn't like that. He didn't like that I didn't try to appeal or appease him. And I remember one time too, they were doing some acting thing, and he was like, Cruz, what do you think? And then I started saying, oh, well, I think this and this. And then it was the guy, we were rehearsing for Les Miserables, the musical, and it was just all the guys doing the guy part for the Revolution. And he was like, well, what about this acting part? Cruz, what do you think, since you're such a hefty something actor? I remember. And I remember being like, I feel like this is a trap. But I was like, but okay, we're supposed to be a collective group and giving each other some, giving the benefit of the doubt. And started to say it and this and that. And then he laughed. And he said, okay, whatever, you and your community theater knowledge. And I just remember being like, what? Like,
this is a full-grown man like bullying a child.
And first off, community theaters are the shit. Shout out to all community theaters that are out there, giving kids, artistic kids, places to express themselves and be themselves. And because I knew a lot of people of color, I mean, the few people of color that were in Whittier, and they were doing theater, and especially a lot of gay people and a lot of LGBTQ plus people were doing theater. Like me being a straight male, I was the minority in theater, and it was cool because I was growing up with something that I wasn't seeing at school, and I was being surrounded by the LGBTQ plus community. And that's that's why I'm a full-on ally to this day. If it wasn't for those people showing me their experiences and what they go through and teaching me and guiding me, and I learned theater from these people, I wouldn't understand their experience. And it's all thanks to community theater. Yeah. So when Mr. Carter was saying that, I was just like, community theater is given way more to the community at large overall than you are by just in your high school. I mean, you're giving with your high school theater, but community theater is everybody. I'm like old people to young people to kids. They're all here. And Whittier has the oldest theater west of the Mississippi. It was started in 1922. No other theater west of the Mississippi is that old. Whittier's the oldest standing one. That's very proud of that fact. Yeah. So I finished. I had a lot of subtle like discriminations like that. But in high school, I don't know. I felt like douchey saying it, but I was one of the popular kids.
Boo! No.
I don't want to say popular. I feel like cool kids.
You're popular.
I was part of cool kids.
Yeah. I mean, that is okay too. Like that is your experience, you know?
Yeah.
And like because I was going to ask, like, you know, this like subtle racism, Mr. Carter, like how did you internalize that, or like how, but it seemed like you were popular. People liked you.
Yeah. Outside of that theater and choir scene. Yeah. Because the theater and choir scene were the outsiders of the overall. They were the kid. And like, as much as I love doing theater and choir, some of those kids were out in the courtyards like belting and going out, and I used to be like, no, I'm not going to do that.
It's a special kind of kid.
Not knocking anybody that does that, but I just felt like a lot of them were always doing it seeking attention. And I get it, as artists, there's probably a lot of like rooted trauma in us that's making us insecure about things, because everybody's insecure. Yeah. But as artists, we just choose to try to show that insecurity as a way of coping with it. So I think this was their version. I just didn't agree with it, but that was their version of it. In high school, I had a really good friend, Peter Cruz, and he is Salvadoran, and he has black blood in him too, and you could see it. His mom definitely looked mixed, mulatto is the term, right? But she was Afro-Latina. His dad was the chauffeur, and his mom was the maid to one of the richest families in Whittier, and they lived at this high point in the hill, and they lived in the back house. And so he was one of my good friends growing up, but he faced a lot of hardships, and he played football, and he just had a lot of problems and he had a lot of hardships. So it was me and him, and it was my other friend Justin Hughes. And when I was a kid growing up, I went to that private school, and I would do theater outside. And because of the theater, I would meet a lot of public school kids. And there was a school called Dexter, and I got along with a lot of those kids. And Dexter was on the other side of Whittier compared to where I was going on the east side. They were more like southwest side. She's from there. So they were like Shane and Isaac and Damien and all these different people. One of them was Justin, and Justin was like a cloth of his own. He was weird as shit, but it was a good weird. And he pushed a lot of my boundaries. And I was always a reader. I was always an avid reader. My mom pushed books on me from the get-go, and I loved reading. Justin was reading even weirder stuff. And Justin was like, fantasy, sci-fi. Here's all these other things. Here's classics, but here's classics that you didn't know about. And then as we got older, here's like religious books. Like I read the Book of Satan, the Book of Mormon, the Torah, the Quran. I read different religious books due to him. He's partly the reason why I left Catholicism and Christianity in general.
Yeah.
So it was like me, him, and Peter. There's a scattering of other friends, but those guys were the two guys that influenced my high school years the most. And my friend Justin passed away about 3 years ago. So those are the two guys that influenced me the most growing up in Whittier.
Yeah. And
like I'm talking about like late night adventures, getting in trouble, doing stupid shit, breaking into high school, almost getting arrested multiple times. Just the good stuff you do that comes in growing up. And they were the ones that I would come to and tell Mr. Carter did this and that, and they were like, fuck that guy. So we'd move on with the day, and you were like, yeah, fuck that guy. Yeah, they were probably what got me through high school. Yeah.
And so what did you do after high school?
I went to Cal State Fullerton.
Okay.
I was a bit of a brat, and I got expelled. I didn't want to play by the rules. And I had a lot of angst and anger, and I was an angsty teen. Stems from all the emo music back in the day. And I just had a lot of problems. It stemmed from a lot of it with Peter and I had a falling out. Justin and I were drifting because Justin wasn't really pursuing school, but I was. And then like an ex-girlfriend who basically, her and I broke up. And I didn't want to follow the rules at Cal State Fullerton, so I pushed it to the point where I got expelled. And then my mom was basically, don't leave school. Like you're too smart to not be in school. Please stay in school and get some degree.
Yeah.
And keep pushing the envelope. So I stayed. I went to Fullerton College, which is a community college. And Fullerton's in Orange County. And Whittier's at the end of LA County, so it's right by Orange County. So I went to Fullerton. Again, I got deeper south into the deeper white zone. And there was a lot more white people there. But I met a lot of good people that influenced me and pushed me, and a lot of good teachers and a lot of good classes. And that's when I started to fall in love with like learning again. And my mom was like, just take the kind of things you want to learn, do the classes that you're interested in. And I did.
That's good advice.
Yeah. And so I floated around for like 2 years. And then finally my mom was like, okay, cool. Now that you're done floating, why don't we see about you transferring and stuff? And I was like, oh, okay. So I graduated. I got 2 AAs, and I got the Cal State transfer to go to Cal State because I wanted to go back to a Cal State and fix the fucked up shit I did from the first one. So I went to Cal State LA this time because I wanted to get closer to LA in the industry, and I wanted to get closer to my roots again.
Yeah, that's pretty close.
Yeah. So I went to Cal State LA. I transferred there, and I was there for 3 years. And all this time, I think I switched my major about 7 times.
Because I was going to ask you, what was the plan? What were you sort of aiming to? Like, did you know what you wanted to study and what you wanted to do after school?
Yeah. I've always known I wanted to be an actor. I'm lucky, and I recognize that I'm lucky.
Yeah.
Especially amongst a lot of millennials today. Millennials like the generation of just like floaters because we don't know. Like, first off, we inherited a shitty economy, and we inherited this like shitty like system of like maybe what our parents and our grandparents experienced. It does not exist like that at all.
No.
You do not get out of high school, go into a job, get a manager position in 5 years, buy a house, have a wife, have kids. By 30, you're like already thinking about retirement, and you got like a 401k and everything building. That does not exist anymore. So I'm lucky that I knew I wanted to be an actor since I was 5. And so I've always been pursuing that. And when I went to Cal State Fullerton, I was a theater major, and was probably the only classes I was interested in other than like speech and debate, but I was still bratty. And so I left, and then I went to Fullerton College, and I wasn't a major. I was undeclared. And then I think I went to theater again, and then I was English for a while, and then I was archaeology for a while, anthropology. I love I love archaeology. That's probably like the one thing I would have been in if I didn't do this. But ultimately, I ended at Cal State Fullerton. I ended as a interpersonal communication major, which is comm, but interpersonal specifically is one-on-one, like you and I are doing right now. And my emphasis was nonverbal communication, so understanding the body. And nonverbal communication is 80% of communication. Diction, tone, voice, what you say, that's 20%. But everything else is the body language.
Yeah, and not a bad thing to study when you're an actor too.
Yes, and that was the main reason I did it, was for the acting. Because you take on these characters, you want to learn the way they speak, their diction, their tone, the way they carry themselves. Because if you can figure all that alone, you could be a mediocre actor and people will still think you're phenomenal because you're like, damn, you look like this whole different character. So that's why I majored at that in Cal State. And Cal State is probably around the time that I started to figure out a lot of shit. A lot of things happened to me. I went through a lot of stuff. I had a lot of good people coming out of my life, and things started to shape me, and push me, and help me figure out what it is I wanted to do and how I wanted to go about it. So, I think that's like a summarized version of it. But there's a lot of good people that have come out of my life that have guided me. Like it takes a village, and it's always taken a village. Like it was my mom. It was Mr. Iden, who was one of my first directors at community theater. When I was 5, he directed me in The Nutcracker, and I was the gingerbread man. Like that was my first performance I've ever done. And I've done plays with him since. Even to this day, he actually hit me up a few weeks ago to be in a local play in Burbank for him. And then Tom Beecher, who used to do these summer day camps. And I love summer and winter day camps because I got to hang out with all these other kids. And he used to put me in the play that he would write at the end of the year because he's a writer, and now he writes for TV shows. He's actually a legit writer. And Tom Beecher was the man. He was the coolest kid at camp, the coolest camp counselor. And he put me in The Wizard of Oz, and I got to play the Scarecrow. But he let me improv so much of it. And for this like 6-7-year-old kid, it was like brand new territory. And I think it also came around the time my grandfather, who was my father figure, my mother's dad, passed away when I was 7. So acting, of course, was a coping mechanism for everything going on. And he let me improvise. And I got to go up and do this play at the end of summer, and all the parents came. And I got to do it with all my friends. And it was so cool. And those 3 people, if it wasn't for my mom, like the first time I knew I wanted to act, I watched Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and I said, I want to do that. Especially it was the episode where like Will Smith and his dad. Oh,
classic.
And so I saw that and I was like,
that'll get
that's me. That's me. Like I get this. And
again, speaking to like seeing ourselves reflected, like that is you. It like was like a laser beam right towards you.
Yeah. And I remember the line where he says, "How come he don't want me, man?" He just breaks down, and I just remember being like, yeah. And it just, whatever it did to me, I just was like, whatever Will Smith is doing to me, I want to do that to other people. That's power right there. And so I told my mom, she remembers the story. I pointed in the screen. I said, I want to be in there. And she was like, okay, I get it. So she put me in theater, and I met Mr. Iden, and she put me in camp, and I met Tom Beecher, and then it's them, and like Peter and Justin, they influenced me a lot. As much as we had the falling out, and I've lost my friend Justin, and I've lost my friend Peter, and we're no longer connected. They taught me a lot. They guided me a lot. And then I had another friend in community college, Dimitri Pereira. He helped me a lot. I took improv, and I met him, and he actually shaped a lot of the way I looked at things, and a lot of the way I perceived, I think, comedy in general, because he was really into Apatow stuff. And Seth Rogen and James Franco and all those guys and all the stuff they were making. And he helped me push a lot of like things and how I perceived it. And it was a lot of those guys that also helped me reformat how I saw what was going on around me. And then also Mariana Esquer, she guided me a lot in figuring things out through majority of my 20s, through all of my 20s. I met her when I was 20 turning into 21, and she shifted everything. She guided me with a lot of stuff. She showed me what it was truly like to understand immigration and people that are immigrants and what's going on in that struggle. And even deeper into understanding. She was probably my moment that I recognized white privilege and white supremacy in a whole in this country, and not and recognizing my own internal privilege that I get, and my own, being a straight white male, and like I am brown, but I'm not like brown.
Yeah, there is. I talk about this like, with as Latinx people, we do have a proximity to whiteness.
Yeah,
and some of us lean heavily into that to the point where we forget, and even take advantage of that and use it against other people in our community. Yeah. And then there's other people, Latinx people, that are so far on the other spectrum that suffer even worse like consequences because of it. So, and it is crazy how I think for so long we sort of aspired to whiteness.
Yes. And
how that sort of is like internalized and weaponized, and it's like a form of like, I think thing that happens to all people, but I think as Latinx people we have like this weird like gray area where
we really do.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for Mariana, I thank her dearly, and I love her a lot for everything she showed me. But if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have realized that I am mazapan. Like, I look like mazapan, the candy, like I'm white. I have some peanut butter and cinnamon in me, but I'm like, I get that white privilege. And I'm lucky because like, other than being indigenous, and I am Latinx, and I didn't grow up with a father in my life, I still am a white, passing, straight male. Mm-hmm. And that is a privilege and a power in and of itself. Yeah. So I'm not the other spectrum of like an Afro-Latina, indigenous Latina, trans, queer, like all these things that are, I'm lucky, and I have a privilege, and I should use that privilege to be an ally and better the struggle of everybody else who is connected, and everybody else who's, I hate the term, but everyone else who's marginalized.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think the same thing, I am an immigrant, my family are immigrants, but I'm fully aware that, when I'm dressed and out and about the world, I register as student, intern. Like, I know that is different than how other people are, other people, I was talking to somebody, I guess, register as Target worker, even though they're just shopping. Or like at the Hollywood Bowl, people are asking them, hey, where's the bathroom? And he's like, I don't work here. Yeah. So and that we have to acknowledge that, because it's not the same experience. Like,
yes.
And, and like the same thing, like there are other immigrants with my story that could have a darker shade skin and have such a different, harsher experience that, and again, like I was able to become a citizen. Like that is its own privilege that, in this fucked up system, I was able to like
get through.
Yeah.
You made it.
But I have to acknowledge that, well, I know very well that if 2 or 3 things would have not aligned in my life, I'd be in a completely different situation.
Yeah.
Like it's like,
it's funny how that works.
I call it luck. I was talking to another guest who was sort of triggered by that work. I think just because he thought I was saying like, I was lucky that this was granted to me. I was like, and to me, it was like, I'm lucky that in this fucked up system rigged against us, I was able to fill in the only real specific requirements that you need that are very specific to only 1 or 2 situations, as opposed to the million other. Yeah. So like, there is a difference. We have to acknowledge we all have like privileges we have to recognize, and not only recognize, but actually do the work to make sure that it's, that we make things more inclusive, more available, like open up the space.
We're elevating everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also to listen. We have to listen, because I think a lot of time, we're like, oh, I'm doing everything. It's like, well, have you asked the question? Have you opened yourself up? Have you opened up your way of thinking to how somebody else's experience could be? Because we can congratulate ourselves for thinking this, but I'm sure I'll say things on this podcast that'll make people cringe. People say stuff on this podcast that makes me cringe sometimes, but just because it's just like, ooh, like yes. Don't use that word, or ooh, like, yeah, like that. But again, we're all just also, I don't want to make it a space where we punish people or call
shut
people out.
Down.
We have to, because again, like we're all just like, whatever I'm talking about, or it's all from my own lived experience that I'm speaking to. And I fully recognize that there's like a million other people that could be like, hey, that was kind of fucked up that you said that. And I'd be like, oh, I didn't even think of that. Like, yeah, okay, thank you. Because I am fully aware I have a blind spot, like I hate the word woke. We all do. Yeah. Because I think if you call yourself woke, you're not that woke, because everyone has the work to do. Yes. That we all have blind spots, and we have to recognize that. And it only like opens up, the conversation wider and allows other people to like have a say.
Yeah. Yeah. Like every time I use the term woke, I think I use it semi-jokingly.
Yeah.
Because I understand like what comes with it and like what it means, but it's also like, it's kind of redundant in and of itself if you're acknowledging yourself as woke.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's the joke playing on that word.
Like once you hear radio DJs joking about it at the radio, I'm like, the word has lost all meaning. Like,
yeah.
Like,
it's lost its power.
Like I remember when I first heard the word woke and they were like, oh, there was this girl, it was this, black woman talking. She was like, I was in this class and I was the only black person there. And she was like, well, there was another black person there, but they weren't woke. And I was like, immediately knew what they meant by that. Like, I was like, yeah. You immediately know, like they're totally drinking the Kool-Aid.
Yes.
And again, speaks to their own experience and how they've lived. But
I think I also like what you said about luck, and I know it triggered that guy.
Yeah.
But if you think about like quantum theory, Einstein's quantum theory, and like the possibility that there can be multiple parallel realities and universes within themselves, and it's all nicely sliced and layered. But there's an alternate reality where you didn't get through. Yeah. And you were not. You weren't lucky enough to get that.
And it could have been a million things.
It could have been a million things. Exactly. Yeah. So you never know. And that is a form of luck. And I think it's Benjamin Button. It's Benjamin Franklin or Thomas Jefferson that said, I find the harder I work, the more luck I have. Mm-hmm. And that's usually what it is. The more opportunities you're pushing for and trying to create and make, the more luck you find that you're getting. And I am air quoting for all those I can't see.
Yeah. And even to that, you can work really hard, but just not be lucky because, our system isn't structured to
benefit you.
Yeah. Like I am lucky I have 2 working legs and I was able to work to do this and this, but if I don't have that and no one's really like creating the space for me to be able to do it regardless. Then, so I do want to get to the writing. Like where did the writing come in?
The first time I remember, I think the writing comes again from my mom. She's a writer. She was actually going to Cal State Northridge when she was pregnant with me, and she was majoring in, I think, screenwriting or something with film. My mom has been a writer and a producer for KTLA 5 before, and she's written scripts before. I think she wrote like 1, maybe 2, and she's written other stuff. I should actually ask her so I could read them. I think I tried to read them a long time ago and she didn't let me. But
a true writer.
Yeah, right. And she is a true writer. She just pushed me. She just pushed me that sometimes you're not going to be heard and sometimes people don't want to listen, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't get it out. And so I wrote. And one of the first times I remember writing was my mom and I were in Whittier and we went to a laundromat. And I was a kid and I think we were living at Rose Hills at the time. And I remember sitting on the laundromat where the folding tables are with a pen or it was a pencil and a composition book. And I remember my mom, when I was a kid, the doctors were like, the school teacher was like, your kid has ADHD. And so she was like, my kid doesn't have ADHD. He just has an over and active imagination. And that's a good thing. My kid's curious and he like wants to be adventurous about the curiosity. And the teachers were like, and shout out to teachers that get bad pay. My mom was a teacher for a while and have to have like 35 to 40 kids and they can't control them. Yeah. But sometimes their way of resolving that is saying your kid has ADHD to get him drugs. So it's simpler for them. And that was definitely what they were trying to do. And my mom was like, my kid doesn't. So she sat me down every night to read books with her after dinner to show that I could sit down for 30 minutes and read with her out loud. And that's also probably acting too. I started acting that stuff out. Yeah. And one of the books we read was the Book of Virtues. And my mom was trying to teach me that religion doesn't define you being a good person. You being a good person is just because you've been a good person. Yeah. Right and wrong, good and bad, that does exist. That doesn't need to be a religious. Religion doesn't get to hold over that. Yeah. So I was reading the Book of Virtues, and I remember sitting on the laundromat with my mom at the folding table, writing the composition book, trying to write stories of people who were going through those virtues or figuring them out. And I remember like finishing and being like, oh, I wrote something cool. Mom, check this out. Check out this line. It's probably like really dumb when I was a little kid, but to me that was awesome that I could do this. Yeah. And I remember writing it and then being like, okay, I'm going to take a break. And then running over and playing like the arcade game. It was like Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat. And then I'd be like, ooh, action heroes. And I'd run back and I'd write what like these characters could be doing, making up my own characters that were influenced by Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter, doing these virtue things and trying to be virtuous and grow and learning. And that was the first, I remember that vividly. And I think that's where it starts from. I saw there was this power. And when I was doing the theater, there was a woman named Fran. And Fran was the mother to all the theater kids while Mr. Iden was directing. She was the badass. And that woman was tough as nails. And I remember that woman flicked me and smacked me a couple times to get in line. And I was just like, "You're not my mom." And she was like, "No, but I'm your mom here." And I was like, "Damn," because you remind me of my mom. So I just had to take it.
Yeah.
But Fran noticed something in me that I like to read. And I had an overactive imagination. She said, "I got a book that I think you're going to like." And she went and she bought me that book. And it was Terry Brooks's King of Shannara, The Last King of Shannara. And she was like, "There's this whole series. And you like Lord of the Rings, right?" And I think I was like, "Yeah, I like the Lord of the Rings movies and stuff." And she was like, "Here's this book. I want you to read it, and I want you to tell me what you think about it after." And like, other than my mom, no one had ever told me that before. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, Fran was the shit. I love Fran. She wrote a note, and I have that book to this day. And it's all beat up and falling apart. But I do not read it. I bought another copy of that book. But that is one of my favorite fantasy series of all time. She opened up a whole new world for me with that series. Mm-hmm. And I have her message. I have the book. It's all yellow and old and falling apart. But I do not touch it. And it's like a landmark for me. It's a reminder. And I remember reading that and being like, whoa, Terry Brooks, the way he describes things, the way he creates these worlds, he writes epics. So he was like, oh man, not just like these short stories or like the Stephen King shit. Stephen King don't got shit on him when it comes to epic fantasies. So Stephen King is great though, but sometimes he's great. But I started trying to write kind of like how he was writing. And then I remember trying to write it and thinking there and like, how can I describe these characters? What should they be going on? And I remember watching Dragon Ball Z and being like, oh, I'm going to write some like Dragon Ball Z stuff too. Yeah. This could be going on in space with people with powers like this. And so I started doing that. So it was a mix of Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, Dragon Ball Z, these games, these Asian animes, and people in my life that just pushed me with books. Mm-hmm. I think that's where it started, as a form of expressing or letting out these ideas. Because I was like, I can't act everything all the time. Yeah. And I got to remember what these ideas I come up with. So the frantic writer, like, oh, this is a good idea, and writing it down. Mm-hmm. That's where it stems from. It's a mix of people.
And so when did you start, when did you start having your writing read? When did you have your writing, did you have your writing performed? Like, when did it start being like something that was like, other people were like, because I had a guess to say writers write for somebody to read it.
Half of art is your creation, and the other half is other people's interpretations and what they take from it and what you've influenced in them. Mm-hmm. I still don't write to let people see it. No one's ever seen it. No, I think, first one's my mom. I remember letting my mom like, hey, immediately in the composition book, check this out. Yeah. And my mom, who was like a good writer, she was probably like, it's a good start. I was like, all right, cool. I wrote like my first short film that someone else had to look at it and write and fix more because I'm not good at screenplays. Mm-hmm. But it was called The Will. And I did it like my first year at Cal LA. It was 2013. And that was my first short film that I had made. And every other one since then, I've been a creator voice on. Me and my friend Keenan Duke he's a really good writer, and he's one of my good friends. And we have a group called Castle Duke Productions. And we made a film called The Road Not Taken. And now we're making one called Brother's Keeper. And then we're writing a third one about a cult. Well, it's about a cult so far, but that could always change. But cults are weird. So it's cool to examine extreme beliefs and religions and people's perceptions. Right now, it's a lot of me because I'm not good at screenplays. Him and I just brainstorm, and I will create. And he's good at like bringing that creation to life on paper. Mm-hmm. But I do write a lot of fiction. I write a lot of short stories. I'm constantly writing scenes and ideas. And there's always a book we always say we've been working on since forever. But there is a book I've been working on for a minute. And that is one that I do intend to push myself to get published and stuff. I think I wrote stuff as a kid, and we did scenes at summer day camp. Mm-hmm. That was probably some of my first stuff. But my first real thing was The Will. That was actually made into a short film. And we won some awards at school for that one. But that was probably the first time. And it was such a weird experience to know you made something and then have people watch it. And I acted in it as well. And to have people be like, oh, it was good. Or people be like, that was shit. And you're just like, cool, this is part of it.
Yeah.
This is part of the figuring it out.
And is there a theme throughout your stories? Is there something you're always sort of writing about? Or is it a couple things just like, what are you trying to say with these stories,
Life is about struggle. The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. That's a good book. Though the first half is good. The second half kind of dropped off because he was being repetitive. But it's a good book because the ideologies about you got to give a fuck, but also you got to realize what you got to not give a fuck about. And he talked a lot about struggle is a necessity for life, and you need to struggle, and struggle is the truth. And he's a white guy writing, and I was like, not bad, because I know as a white guy, you probably don't have as many struggles as people of color, but not bad. And I definitely think that's what it is. Like, there's a quote by John Steinbeck. One of my favorite books is East of Eden. And he says in the book, he says in a quote, if you are not writing about to glorify, I'm butchering this, but glorify the humanity and the human soul and the human soul's ability to prevail or triumph through evil and hardship and bad, like, then what is your purpose as a writer?
Yes.
What are you doing? Like, if you're just trying to write shit to crap on people, go home.
Yeah.
Don't do that. No one needs to hear you, because there's always trolls online. There's always trolls on Facebook and social media. The trolls are always the one that feel the need to speak up. So they're constantly writing. So if you're writing good stuff, good literature, good screenplays, good movies, TV, any of that stuff, write to show humanity and humanity overcoming struggle and strife and hardship. So I think that is a theme. Like, The Road Not Taken deals with a cold-blooded murder and the brother and the boyfriend overcoming the murder of the sister and the girlfriend. And also just the idea that women in general are murdered more than everybody else. Black women, indigenous women, more than anybody, indigenous women, trans women, all that stuff. We wanted to, because she was a black woman that was murdered. And it was a senseless murder. And it's coping with that stuff and figuring it out. But we put a little bit of magical realism and fantasy in it. And Brother's Keeper has to deal with sex trafficking and children that disappear, and especially young indigenous children. We're not like in your face saying like, oh, indigeneity and black people and stuff. They just happen to be that. And we're tackling this issue. And you should get that culturally, this does happen to these people. And you should click that. We don't have to be advertising, we're black, we're indigenous. It's just, you should know, because you should be aware, and you should be paying attention to the news and stuff, because they're not, and we know they're not.
Yeah.
And by them, I mean a specific people that are not always paying attention. And cults is another thing we want to figure out. And I'm sure it's going to be someone overcovering or figuring it out, because extreme beliefs and religions and these things affect our lives so much. Christianity was such a big part of my life as a child. And my mom is still, but my mom's a very like liberal Christian. She is not like the other Christians that you see all the time on the news. None of those GOP Republicans. But it's just not me.
Yeah.
And so just the idea of the influence and like seeing the negative effect it has like on someone like my grandmother, and like the harshness that she has. She uses her God as a means of like going after people, and like she worries and dwells and like thoughts and prayers, and it doesn't do anything. And she's like a negative side of religious. So I want to tackle stuff like that, and how religion shapes so much of us.
Yeah.
Now, you were talking about religion. I don't know if it's Catholicism, but
yes,
more often than not, it is, right, with Latinos.
Yeah.
And that's because white Spaniards came over here with their Catholic church and their cross, and they were like, God is good and stuff, and forcing it down our throats. So it's tackling issues like that: murder, sex trafficking, religion, but human beings overcoming stuff like that and trying to figure themselves out, because we're constantly growing, and that's the point. It never stops.
Yeah, it's fascinating, of all the writers I've been interviewing, how so many of them just want to tell their story, want to speak their truth, and also just convey to other people the humanity of it, because if we understand the humanity of someone else, then, and be in their shoes for like 10 seconds, then we will, when we go out into the world, we will, if we encounter that person, we will already have like a drop of like, oh, I know who they are. Like,
yeah,
I know what they're going through.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to like Latinx representation, I think the media, movies and television are important. It is like indoctrinating people. It is pouring a message into your living room every night for 3 to 4 hours. And that reflects the perception you have of others.
Yes.
And how, when you walk in the world and how you interact. So if you yes, run for office, yes, protest, yes, like do everything else. But I think we also need to be changing the narrative of Latinx people in the media, because that happens. You like, you get out of the womb and you're seeing magazines, billboards, television shows, and if we're not, because we're also susceptible to that,
Yes, you're 100% right. Representation does matter, especially today. So many dumb white shows and sitcoms and TV shows and movies are made, and they don't even give us the time of day to make stupid shit like that. But they're constantly backing stuff, and you're watching, you're like, who fucking greenlit this? Like, who said yes to this?
It'll be 6 episodes, it'll go in. I'm like, we couldn't.
Yeah.
It's the same thing over and over. I'm like, we couldn't do anything new this time.
Yeah. Like One Day at a Time. Like, I'm not exactly the biggest fan of that show, but that's because I don't like multicams and sitcoms in general. Mm-hmm. But One Day at a Time was a bomb sitcom. They were tackling things that are normally not tackled for sitcoms, especially with the Latino family. And why did it only get 3 seasons? Yeah. Like, that should have gotten way more, because I've seen dumber white shows get way more than that.
We're calling you out.
Yeah.
I think that is on its 3rd season. I read that somewhere and I was like, that's still odd.
Yeah.
That is odd. I thought it would have been one of the shows that got canceled.
Yeah. Yes. And yeah, I did an interview for Voyage LA, the magazine. Mm-hmm. And when I did that interview, I talked about what you did, because one of it says is, how is your industry changing? And that, like, I sat there for a long time thinking about that, because it's a big deal.
Yeah.
And it is shifting and changing, and it's better now than it ever was, because progress is progress, and you got to acknowledge that. Yeah. But it is definitely not anywhere close to where it needs to be. Not at all. And you're right about changing the narrative, because how you are perceived on television and in filmed and in media and news affects how other people perceive you in real life.
Yeah.
It's all about perception. And one of the things I'm working on right now is a series called LA. Mm-hmm. And I have a lot of amazingly talented people in that. And like Keenan from Castle Duke, and my friend Sebastian, who works at 7-Eleven, and Rosa, and Natalia, and Bex, and Alicia, and Antonio, and Joanna, and everybody that's just come in and helped shape this and push it, because it takes a village, and it's taken a really good village to make this series. But it's a web series that it follows 4 Latinx people trying to make it and survive and thrive in LA. And our pitch line is, it's expensive to be poor.
Yes.
And it's the city's overpriced and overpopulated, mm-hmm. and finding your place. And so it follows, the main character is Aiden Alvarez, and he's a brown actor trying to make it in Hollywood. I wonder where that comes from. And he is just trying to figure out how to navigate life. And he's, a brown person, and on top of being a brown person, he's a millennial. So in the shitty economy that we have, and on top of that, he decides to be an artist, because that mm-hmm. makes everything so much easier, right?
Yeah.
So he's all 3 of these things that are set against him, but they're things that he is trying to struggle with and prevail. Humanity.
Yeah.
Because when people watch this, like Atlanta, Donald Glover made a show about black people, for black people. The writing room is all black people. But at the end of the day, I watched that show and I'm like, oh, damn,
I love that show.
That's us. That's me. I get that.
Yeah.
And that's the point. You're supposed to find the similarities in the differences. Yeah. You find that and you're like, that makes sense. So white people can see that, because we've been having to watch white content since forever and get where we connect to it.
Oh, yeah.
They can do the same.
Yeah.
And that's shifting.
And that's like such a, because, I see panels and all that stuff, and people are like, especially white people are like, well, white writers only write white stories, and then only like people of color write people stories. And it's like, first of all, no one is saying that's, first of all, I could write a white story. You know why? Because I've been watching it for, I could write, no offense, Stranger Things, but I could have just watched a bunch of Spielberg movies and written that. But they can't write my story. They can't write our story.
I do like Stranger Things though. I like the fantasy aspect of kids and this world.
But it's very reflective of how they grew up, what they saw. Mm-hmm. Like, believe it or not, I don't want to see another movie about, kids in the suburbs and on their bikes, because that doesn't speak to me. But I could, I could write that no problem, because I've seen it a million times. But they can't write our story, so that's why I'm saying and it's also damaging for them to write our stories, because they're just coming from their whiteness to sort of translate what our
What's their
humanity is.
lens of looking at us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they don't have anything for reference.
Yes.
All they have is old tired stereotypes.
Yeah.
And the media that's already perverse, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what we're trying to do with LA. We're trying to write about people of color. Starts off with Latinx people, but we have other people of color that are going to come in to start writing other people of color in the world of LA. And it's got like Aiden Alvarez, and I explained to him, but his like best friend, his eccentric best friend is Bernie Alba. He's a writer. He's out there and weird, but he is trying to figure out and find his place because writing is such like it's such a hard thing to do, period. But especially in Latino cultures, God, Latinos are so divisive in general. So you just have a lot of Latinos because they're survivors. They don't want you to be an artist because that's not a job that's going to really help you survive.
Yeah.
And they come from a place of love because they just want you to make it and survive and get to the next gen.
Yeah.
But it's also like you got to do what you love and you got to be happy. So it's Bernie trying to find the same thing and balance that. And then it's Maya Baez. She is pansexual and she's an Afro-Latina and she's a millennial floater. She doesn't know what she want to do.
Yeah.
She's trying to figure that stuff out. She didn't get it. And we're also trying to figure out, we're doing ages. She's early 30s because you don't see a lot of stuff about, first off, a woman, an Afro-Latina, pansexual, and a millennial, but in her early 30s, early going into mid, trying to figure out where the hell she is and what she's doing. And then we have Rita Montes, who is DACA. She's undocumented. And her and Aiden are on and off again, husband and wife.
Yeah.
And they're trying to find their place in things. And she's trying to find her place in things. And she's getting into law, which is the one thing that's always prohibited her. These laws and rules and regulations have prohibited her from being who she wants. She's been a child of two worlds, and she's trying to get into this one world just to fit and feel like she belongs, that validity, that feeling of importance.
Yeah.
So she gets into law to figure out the things that have always stopped her so she can see how she can maneuver it and help others as well as herself.
Yeah.
So we are trying to tackle real people with real struggles, but just finally brought out and represented in a series that is just meant to change the scope and change the narrative and show other people that you don't have to be Latino to get this stuff. You don't have to be Latinx to get this content. You can find similarities in the differences and you'll understand us. Yeah. So you're right in all your things that you were saying. Like it does, representation does matter. Yeah. And we do got to change those things. And Stranger Things, as good as I think it is, because I like the idea of kids overcoming stuff, especially fantasy and sci-fi, but it doesn't need to be white kids in suburbia.
No, it does. I'm from Chicago. I'm from a city. I want to see the story about kids just growing up in the city. Like,
yeah. I hate that term urban, but that does explain that area. But yeah, I want to see kids of color in cities battling and figuring this stuff out.
And it's not about gun violence, and it's not about like where is just the joy in our experience, you know?
Exactly. And there's tons of it.
I do want to shout out your podcast.
Oh yeah. Thanks. It's Millennials Meet World. It's NHMC's podcast, the National Hispanic Media Coalition. You guys should find them. Social media. They're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. They do a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, they do.
They're
bold. Like the things they do, I'm like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
They're taking the fight.
Yeah.
It's cool.
NHMC's been around since 1986. And they are the oldest Latino organization fighting for this. Yeah. And they call out the studios and the TV organizations, and they fight. And they're not fighting just for fighting's sake. They want to work. Yeah. So they're not calling you out to say like we're going to take you down and destroy you. No, they're trying to say, hey, this is a real issue and a real problem. You're not paying attention. Pay attention. Let's sit down at the table and let's figure this out. Yeah. Let's do memorandums of understanding. Let's work together. We have writers programs. We have two. We have a Latino Scene Showcase, and that's coming up in June. And then we have a gala, which is to recognize all the stars. And we have local impact awards for New York, DC, and LA. And it's to recognize and elevate our talent. And we promote our talent, and we promote them through the podcast, and we promote them through the website. But so NHMC does it all, trying to provide opportunities and resources, trying to push and create opportunities and resources, trying to change the narrative, trying to showcase and highlight, and just trying to elevate Latinx voices in general. Yeah, you guys should all check them out. You should find them on social media. Check out Millennials Meet World. It's on Spotify. It's on iTunes. It's on SoundCloud. It's on Podbean too. Yes, it is.
I got to get on that.
Yeah. But yeah, and it's doing the same thing you're doing. But you're even greater because you're independent and you're doing this on your own. And I think that's badass.
Thanks.
So
mine's more of a niche podcast, but it's really about a bunch of other things. And I think your podcast is the same.
Yeah. And, but it doesn't matter because white people got tons of podcasts about talking about white comedy and stuff like that. Why can't we have multiple ones? So
yes. I want a full day of just brown people speaking in your ear through podcasts.
Yeah.
I can't have two white guys talking in my ear anymore.
Yeah.
It's just not fun for me anymore.
Yeah, you've heard enough of it.
I have, I have. So I do want to ask, where can people find you, all your social media?
Oh, people can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. It's all Cruz W Castillo. Mm-hmm. I made it the same across the board, so it's easier.
Smart.
So yeah, find me on there. Especially if you guys are also artists and you want to work together. I love working together.
Awesome.
I love collaborating and being collective and working with different people on different things. So I want to push myself. So yeah, challenge me.
And I always ask people who are, Latinx writers that they admire, that they love, that they want to shout out.
Sebastian Fernandez, he's my friend. Rosa Navarrete, Natalia Provatas. They're all writers on LA, and they're badass and they're working hard. So I admire them. I admire anybody that's on the same level as me, pushing myself, because you need to surround yourself with people that are better at things than you are, so you can get better.
Yeah.
And they definitely do, and I appreciate them for that. I really like the relationship like Tanya Saracho and Gloria Calderon Calette have with each other.
Yeah, goals.
Yeah, because they seem to always be supporting each other on social media. I like that. I really like that. Because so many times, again, Latinos can be divisive, and especially in this industry, we're taught to be cutthroat and cut each other down to get higher. But I like that Latinos are not doing that anymore. I feel like we're switching.
It is switching.
We're keeping that familia identity with trying to like push each other and elevate each other. Because when we elevate, you just elevated like potentially 5 to 10 other more. And I think that's just like shifting us up.
Yeah.
So hell yeah to that. For writers that are writing screenplays like movies and TV. Again, I feel like I don't know very many because I don't feel like there's not that many out there. But Dan Hernandez, he just wrote, he's my homie and he's great. He's talented. He writes for The Tick. He wrote for One Day at a Time, but that's because it's not on anymore. But he wrote for the newest season of The Tick, season 2. And he wrote, he was the main writer on Detective Pikachu, the brand new movie.
Yeah.
Pokemon. And I thought that was great. It was a really cute movie. Big time nostalgia. And Dan is a full on like fan, boy, geek, nerd, whatever term in the positive way you want to use it. But that guy gets it, and that guy lives and breathes it, and he really pours it into his writing. So shout out to him. He is a Latino writer that's out there doing it. Cool. So he's one, definitely.
Yeah, I like that because I saw that you interviewed him, and I'm like, I like that like a Latino wrote Detective Pikachu. Like that. That's the goal. I think right now we have a lot of important work to be representative and really voice who we are and have a stake in that, and but I also like that is the goal, to just like it wasn't like he didn't have to. It wasn't like Pikachu en español, It was like it was just Detective Pikachu.
He didn't have to write. It wasn't about Latinos, so they were like, oh, let's get the Latino guy. Yeah. He just happened to write a movie, and he just happened to be Latino.
So I always ask my guests to help me title the podcast. So the prompt is a blank Latinx writer. So with that prompt, it's just you can move them around. You can add more words. It's something that you feel like reflects your identity, your journey, what you're about, so that when I put these episodes up, someone will see like, oh, this title, oh, that's like me. I should listen to it. Like, oh, I didn't even know there was someone else like me. I need to hear from this person. Okay. The other purpose too is because I want to make this podcast inclusive, is so that when all these episode titles go up, someone will be like, oh, I haven't really seen anyone like me. So it's a good recruitment tool for people to be like, oh, let me reach out because they haven't covered my story yet. Okay, I got one. Oh, I don't want to change it. Go for it. I'm just gonna put the word a pretend Latinx writer. It's got a double meaning. Number one is the whole syndrome where you get into some place and you don't feel like you belong there. Mm-hmm. And you feel like you're pretending sometimes. And sometimes in this industry, you do have to fake it until you make it. Mm-hmm. And you got to like lie to get your way in there just to be seen. And especially for people of color,
especially for brown people that are trying to do it, because we don't have the same access to opportunity and resources like a lot of other people do.
Yeah.
So sometimes you got to pretend to get in. But also, too, the main root for me is I just remember as a kid is summer day camp, playing with friends at school. The word pretend was used a lot. And that was one of my favorite words, and it still is. And I just remember kids like me going like, pretend we're this, pretend we're that, pretend we're this. Pretend was such a powerful magic word, because every time you said it, every kid got it. And every kid stopped and was like, okay, well, how are we shifting this story? And that was the beginning of storytelling for us. And that was a lot of us learning to create our own worlds and our own characters. And pretending was a great way to take yourself out of this and say like, let's do something different. And let's all see something different collectively together. I live by a park in Alhambra. So when I walk, sometimes I see the kids at the playground. And like, maybe it was a couple weeks ago, I was taking a walk with my friend Sebastian, and we were just walking by, and I heard one kid go, no, wait. Pretend. Let's pretend that we're doing this. And they all stopped, and we saw them, and they respect the word.
Yeah.
And they all said, okay, let's like, you're Superman, I'm Iron Man, and I'm this and that. And it was a little girl. She was bossing them around, and she was like, I'm Superman, and you're this and this. And I was like, damn well, she can be Superman. Yeah. She can be anybody she wants. And it was cool to see generations later, that word is still magic, and it's still power. So for me, it's the word pretend, because every time I write something or I get into a creative mode or do anything, like even this, I'm trying to remember my little child self and remember, am I doing myself justice? Am I happy? Would I be proud of who I am? Would little kid Cruz look up to adult Cruz now and be like, cool, you made it. You're Superman. You're all the heroes in the comic you wanted to be. You're doing it. Are you pretending? And so that's what it is in my head. Am I still pretending?
That's cool. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a perfect title. I love this question because you see